Envisioning Higher Worlds, the Goethean approach. Seeing nature for what it is. Steiner said, to truly know the world, look deeply within your own being. To truly know yourself, take real interest in the world. So there's an irreducible wholeness to nature. Biological life, ecosystems, and complex systems surpass full understanding when dissected into parts. Instead, they exhibit a holistic nature where the entirety transcends the cumulative impact of its individual elements. Full comprehension necessitates recognizing the interconnectedness and interdependencies among these elements. Traced back to ancient philosophy, crucial for a holistic grasp in diverse scientific disciplines. It's the opposite of reductionism, which oversimplifies complex systems by breaking them into isolated parts. So we can never know the greater knowledge of everything through the reductionist approach. So science is a belief in the ignorance of experts. So what do we have? The quantum world, what scientists tell us to believe, or we want to connect with nature and see this metamorphic process. What's the true path of science? Well, we can say in some ways both, but because our society and our minds developed this electrical equipment, but it's gone the wrong path. And this is something I discussed in the other workshop on electrical about, Tesla's work. If we would have developed the non-electromagnetic currents, we wouldn't have the world strung with wires. We'd have cell phones that didn't need power and didn't cause biological damage to us when we used them. Anyway, right, we have the subsensible versus the supersensible world, right? And we think the quantum, so basically the quantum realm is like a distorted mirror of the higher forces, right? So we can, draw a connection between the, quantum states and stages of plants. I haven't fully developed this idea, but this is something anybody can think of. I'm trying to put this together to really understand. So this is just current stage of my comprehension, right? So seed stage, right? In the seed, right? Quantum potential. Just as quantum particles exist in a superposition of states, the seed stage of a plant represents a realm of immense potential, like an uncollapsed quantum wave function. If we want to think in that sense, the seed holds within it the possibilities of growth and development. Then the germination stage, valence shell excitation. As a seed germinates, it enters a phase of energetic activation analogous to an electron in an excited state. Just as electrons move to a higher energy levels in valence shells, the plant begins to break free from its dormant state, initiating growth and preparing for further transformation. Right, vegetative states, stable orbitals. The vegetative state of a plant corresponds to a period of stable growth and development, reminiscent of electrons occupying stable orbitals within the valence shell. The plant acquires structural integrity, establishes leaves, stems, roots, and efficiently captures energy through photosynthesis. Right, and the reproductive stage, quantum coherence. Similar to quantum coherence, where particles exist in a synchronized state, the reproductive stage of a plant exhibits a harmonious coordination of processes. Flowers bloom and reproductive structures emerge, involving intricate interaction with pollinators or natural forces. The stage represents the coherence and unity of purpose in plant reproduction. And, basically, basically quantum superimposition, right? Seed formation and dormancy. When plants enter the seed formation and dormancy phase, metaphorically enter quantum superposition again, where they hold the potential for future growth and regeneration. The seeds encapsulate the essence of the plant, representing a suspended state of possibilities, awaiting the right conditions to manifest their transformative potential once again. And what we find is the reproductive stage in plants, right? Because it's outside the plant. And I didn't put it in this particular workshop because I've actually done workshops on just the whole plant thing. And there's so much to it with the plant intelligence, but basically the reproductive part of the plants, the astral part of the plants only have the physical and the etheric. The astral is part of the atmosphere and interacts with the plants through the insects and other natural forces like winds that move the pollen. So the plants connect with the astral, but they don't have it inherent within their being, right? So that's this quantum coherence with, other realms. I like this Vita Austin's work. For those that are familiar, she's doing some most amazing work with crystallization of water. So here she put a sunflower seed and petri dish of water for like 1 minute, takes it out, freezes it, and gets the sunflower pattern. I'm going to read a quote here from Hilton Hotima, some amazing old books. Let the flowers be an example to expound the mystery. They charm our eyes and make us drowse with their perfume. The flower is born of the seed, fallen into the earth. Even so, when our body returns to the substance of the earth from which it is made, the spirit that is held captive is breathed out like a perfume into the higher realm. For the spirit was contained in the body, just as the perfume was contained in the seed. Plato, this world is indeed a living being endowed with a soul and intelligence, a single visible living entity containing all other living entities by which their nature are all related. So we can think of ourselves, right? The biosphere, we're integral to the biosphere. We can call ourselves anthropic consciousness nodes. Our lower ego separates us, but inherently, we're thoroughly interconnected chemically, energetically, electromagnetically. So it's Gaian biomass, right? 545 gigatons, right? Of that, plants, 82%, bacteria, 12-13%, animals, 0.47%, humans, 0.01%. So humans, our biomass makes up 0.01% of the biomass of the biosphere. So I think this is like when people say, oh yeah, the simulation theory, right? We're in a simulation. I'm going, yeah. We're 0.01% of this whole living thing on the planet, and we're an important critical part in our higher selves. But do you think this whole biomass, this whole world was made just for some computer god simulation? I like to sort of reflect on these things. So basically plants are sessile organisms, I mean they can't move. The singular metamorphic organ, right? We're ensouled, like Aaron mentioned earlier in our break discussion. But in shamanism, right, the different organs represent different animals. They have to work together, right? Or we can think like in Taoism or even some of the Western traditions where the different organs are related to planets, right? So we're an ensouled organism. Our soul's inside of us with all the organs, but the plant's not. The plant only has one organ, the plant. The seed, the stem, the leaves, the flower, it's the same organ going through metamorphic processes. Its soul is outside, and we'll see where that soul is at when we get to by the time we get to the end of this session. So plants, they can move without muscles, see without ears, see without eyes, hear without ears, and taste, smell, breathe, then calculate. They have memory, they have a social life, they're intelligent. Are they conscious? Do they have a soul? I'll let you answer those questions yourself. So here's Goethe's approach to science. And I said earlier, this is how I've sort of broken it down and schematized it, going through different books, trying to understand the different things. So usually it's 4 stages, which we'll get into. But I like to think of the process and the method. So, and you'll understand why I've done this. The process of observation and interconnection with an individual phenomenon, such as a single plant, leads to a deep understanding of its inherent patterns and forms. This process becomes a new organ of cognition, allowing the observer to see how the phenomenon relates to other patterns and processes in nature. Once the archetypal pattern is perceived and understood, it can then be applied to inform the larger method of studying natural processes. So the process is like about a single phenomenon. The method involves applying the process of observation and interconnection to the larger realm of natural processes, seeking to comprehend the underlying patterns and forms of governing them. The method requires a holistic and dynamic approach, recognizing that everything in nature is interconnected and constantly changing. The method is not a rigid set of rules or procedures, but rather a flexible and creative approach to comprehending the natural world. So this is my creative approach, as I've put together from the best I could understand, and practices and meditations. And what was I going to say is, the idea will come back. So here's the process. Goethean process. Observation begins with a careful, attentive observation of the natural world, the phenomenology. Through observation, one seeks to understand the phenomenon being studied in its totality as a unity of parts and process. And we go back to that quote in the first part of this, that phenomenology is like a total consciousness, not just our experience of things, but our total soul experience of reality of this, which we're focusing on this one phenomenon at this point. Sensory experience. The Goethean process emphasizes the use of the eyes to gain a direct, unmediated experience of the phenomenon. Intuition. In addition to sensory experience, the Goethean process relies on intuitive insight and a kind of thinking with the heart to arrive at a deeper comprehension of the phenomenon. Again, this goes back to the beginning. We talked about once we get to the processes of thinking with the mind going, we need to open up the heart and them work together as a holistic, whole body thinking or phenomenological experience. Imagination. The Goethean process encourages the use of imagination to creatively engage with the phenomenon, seeing it in new and unexpected ways. All right, so imagination is an organ of cognition. It's like now, the modern world is people's organs of cognition, so they relate to it. And that organ of cognition is actually taken over. Michael Nell's recent book, The Indoctrinated Brain, where he discusses the technocratic takeover of the world through the COVID scam, where they basically use the fear propaganda to take over people's hippocampus. They can no longer relate with their autobiographical self, and they could only identify with the narrative, which then, to be part of the narrative, you had to get your jabs. So that was basically, what that becomes people's organs of cognition. So what we want to do, we want to create new organs of cognition based on these comprehensive archetypal structures that we experience in nature or through meditations of things in nature, which we can then relate to other things. Like when I first learned about the metamorphoses of plants back when I was at Borderland, the first thing that popped in my mind was the geological structure of the planet, and totally overrode my conceptualities of basic sedimentary geology, which I no longer believe, but that's a whole other subject. I'm just trying to explain what these organs of cognition, where they can lead us. So wholeness, the Goethean process seeks to comprehend the phenomenon as a whole rather than reducing it to its individual parts. Then the method, it's participatory, right, where we bring the process into this. Emphasize active participatory engagement with the natural world rather than relying solely on external instruments or measurements. The meter reading science. It's contextual, seeks to understand the phenomenon in its larger context, including cultural, historical, and ecological context. Because it's cultural. What do you mean by that? Well, maybe the herbs or the plant you're studying may have had some cultural context, which may have actually been part of its greater interactions with peoples in the past, right? So there's much more to this than just understanding the biological essence of a plant growing. How does it interconnect with society and reality? Because maybe the plant is reaching out, but we don't want to think in those teleological terms until we can perhaps experience it coming from there, but we don't seek it. It's comparative. It involves comparing different phenomena or experiences to gain deeper insights and broader comprehension. It's iterative, involves an iterative process of observation, reflection, and refinement as one continues to deepen their comprehension over time. Right. Dialogue encourages dialogue and collaboration among practitioners as a way of expanding and deepening one's knowledge of the natural world. So, right, you want to interact with other people who are doing this, right? And because you are dealing with a subjective realm and your experience of the objective. So it's really good to have a Socratic dialogue going with other practitioners in this. And, this is one of the good things with the ether force, is that, there is these dialogues going on, like in the ether force public chat. You'll see people doing this to a certain degree, perhaps not the level of what we're doing here, but some pretty amazing conversations going on in there. So the Orphalons, right, the archetypal plant, which is our goal. This is what Goethe saw through studying plants, is eventually he came, through his, through the process, he basically came to understand one single plant, or the single plants, and then eventually all of the plants. And there is just one plant, the vegetative surface of the planet. So Steiner said, Goethe does not flee from reality in order to create an abstract world of thought, which has nothing in common with reality. No, he goes deeper into reality, into its constant changes, its becoming and moving, in order to find the immutable laws. He confronts the individual phenomenon in order to see the archetype in that individual. Thus, there arose in his mind the archetypal plant and the archetypal animal, which are nothing other than the idea of the animal, the idea of the plant. These are no empty general concepts which belong to some gray theory. They are the essential bases of organism with a rich, concrete content full of life and clarity. So when Steiner says like idea of the animal, idea, I capitalize those because he means like idea in the Platonic sense, the greater idea from the realm of archetypes, which is the realm of the spiritual reality. That's why I sort of struggle, right? Spiritual science, right? Because people think spiritual is like some pie in the sky stuff, or science. Science, I hate science, right? So what terms can we really use for these? Heavens knows, right? We do the best we can. I'd like to call it the cognitive sciences, sort of to do it. This is some pictures from Olive Witcher's The Plant Between Sun and Earth. Goethe said there's a delicate empiricism that makes itself utterly identical with the object, thereby becoming true theory. But this enchantment of our mental powers belongs to a highly evolved age. And Olive Witcher, who wrote that book with George Adams, said, Goethe seeks the explanation of something living, not merely in the logically thought-out relationship of cause and effect, but through perceptive judgment, meaning a perceiving of the truth within the whole, while observing so as to reach the archetypal picture or idea to which the phenomenon relates. So we're trying to see this greater picture, not that you're necessarily going to see the aura around the plant. Where you look at it visually, which you may, but perceptually, you certainly will. And because I have, and you can see it to a certain extent studying, but really it's more the conceptual higher framework that exists within the mind, seeing beyond the discursive point. There may be a difference between seeing and seeing, that the eyes of the spirit have to work in a perpetual living connection with those of the body, for one otherwise risks seeing and yet seeing past a thing. And Olive Witcher again, Goethe believed that the true theory is contained in the phenomenon. The phenomena our senses see do not deceive us. They are not unlike the ideal reality which brings them forth. As the Greek origin of the word implies, the theory is the true seeing of the thing, the insight that should come with healthy sight. Yet man is so constituted that he does not really see unless he meets what he sees with spiritual activity on his own part. So we're thinking here, theory, right? Theo, right? That means God, right? So that's the word theory comes from. So this is, true theory is that which we see as bringing forth the natural world. And that's what the spiritual activity is. It's not something you have to believe. It's something you can only know through direct observation. And this is a diagram I've got from Matt at Footnotes to Plato, which is a wonderful YouTube channel that I would recommend to everybody. And he diagrams this out in pieces on a chalkboard, but it was such a brilliant sort of explanation of Goethe's participatory method. So let me get my laser pointer on. And so basically it shows, to Goethe, we have this whole sort of realm. It's a way of knowing the natural world, right? Our mind's on par with nature, right? It's a continuous circuit. So to Goethe, right, the light from the sun basically draws forth sight from within us. And color basically emerges between the objective and the subjective. And we get into this quite deeply in the third part of this. We'll just mention it here. But what's ever happening out here in the objective realm, there's roots of being, right? This is down here in what we call the subconscious or superconscious, however you want to do that. So while we're seeing this out here, we're relating it in here, right? So the outer world calls forth the inner world, and they meet and participate in each other, they're cultivating inner capacities. So the roots of phenomena are shared with the roots of mind. So this participate in the archetypal dynamic giving rise to the form. So in essence, nature depends on the subject for completion, and the subject depends on the world to bring it to its senses. So this is our higher function. Basically, it's the experiential grounded scientific method reconnects the soul and the world, right? And this is how we can see the world archetypally. And like I say, I recommend getting the Footnotes to Plato, going and watching. He's got a whole series on these, goes through the different philosophers. And obviously, he thinks the highest of Goethe when he shows this. So training the senses, how can we, senses don't deceive, the judgment deceives. So how do we train the senses so the judgment's not deceiving us? So cultivate a state of inner silence and receptive openness. Observe and experience the world directly without bias. Allow the senses to take in the full richness and complexity of the world. Develop a critical and discerning mind. Evaluate the information received through the senses, which is why I did the trivium and quadrivium at the beginning, because we really need to use these processes in this. Distinguish between what is real and what is illusory, right? The logic process. Following these steps, one may gain a deeper, more accurate comprehension of the world around us. And here we see, so here is, so we get the mind going, right? And then here's grammar, logic, rhetoric. These are basically, the trivium is the processes of mind that we use all the time. We keep running into this, that these are the essential components. When we use them properly, let's see, somebody wanted to come in the room here. I must have missed it. I hope they try and come back on. Yeah, I have to watch the screen. So somebody tried to join. I'm sorry if I missed them. Hopefully they'll try again. Yeah, steps in the Goethean process. Exact sense perception. Undertake a detailed sensory-based observation of the phenomenon. This is the process. This is the first part for like one single species. Suspend judgment and preconceptions. Observe in an open and listening posture. Exact sensorial imagination. Bring together observed static parts and make them fluid in the imagination as a dynamic process in time. Use imagination as a tool of perception. Visualize the coming into being of the form and its journey into the future to completion or death. Encounter the absent whole. Absent whole, right? Because when you're looking at a plant just at one point, it's not the whole plant, right? It's not the seed, it's not the flower. That's what we mean. So encountering the whole. Assume a posture of receptive attentiveness to let phenomenon reveal something of its essential nature. Deepen the dynamic transformation envisioned in the previous step. Reveal the formative gesture of the organism or its life principles. Encounter sudden insights to disclose the whole phenomenon or the unity that is always present but never seen. Becoming one with the phenomenon. Transcend a particular organism studied and encounter its archetype. Merge with the organism through intuitive perception. Grasp its inherent meaning or creative potency. Understand the archetype that manifests in a multiplicity of forms, only one of which is the plant being studied in its present state there. So seeing the whole of the plant, recognize the plant as a living organism extending beyond immediate observation, unveiling the interconnectedness of all life and revealing spiritual dimensions in nature. Understand the plant's complexity, a blend of physical, etheric, and astral elements shaping its form and function. Perceive individualities in consciousness in plants through meticulous observation and intuition. Consider the plant within its broader environment and ecosystem, emphasizing interrelationships and dependencies. Achieve comprehensive understanding through a synergy of scientific observation and spiritual insight, deepening insights into the natural world. Embrace a fully holistic approach. The entirety of a plant eludes full comprehension through reductionistic or mechanistic methods. View the plant holistically, acknowledging its individuality, consciousness, and spiritual significance within the biosphere and its connection to the cosmos. So the seed, the flower, and everything in between, these are all essential. So the Goethean botanical approach, right, rejects isolating a plant as a single development stage as its entirety. Embraces cognitive observation across metamorphic stages: seed, shoot, stem, leaf, fruit, flower, fruit, seed. Enables higher order processing for understanding the archetypal source of the observed plant. Recognizes plants' individualities and consciousness through keen observation and intuition. The environmental context, acknowledging a plant's place within its environment and ecosystem. Emphasizes understanding the plant as part of a broader web of relationships and interdependencies. An integrated approach advocates a blend of scientific observation and spiritual insight. For comprehensive understanding, rejects the limitations of reductionist or mechanistic approaches in grasping the entirety of a plant. So, right, so what we want to see is the whole of the plant in our consciousness, not any individual stage, but all together, right? All right. So the point is basically at no point in our discursive consciousness can we see the whole of the plant. We have to meditate on this, watching a plant. In the old days, they had to like watch a plant actually grow, right? Go through its stages. If you have a garden, which I have, and I miss gardening because I'm not doing it in present situation, see it grow up from a sprout into its seeds, branch out into its flowers and seed and fruit or vegetable, whatever. The Goethean approach is to hold this entire picture in your mind as one temporal unity. And this becomes an organ of cognition. Now, the good thing is even these days, there's plenty of time-lapse photography on YouTube. So you can get, so you can watch plants grow. So we can watch a plant grow to fruition and forward and backward. So what I do, I've sped this up a little bit, so it's a little jerky because it takes a while, but I really like watching time lapses of plants, and I set them up so they play forward and backward, and just I meditate on them and just watch them until I can just see, so I can then close my eyes and go into meditation and see the entire process as an expanded temporal framework, like, because the ether exists in a different time frame. The plant lives in a different time frame than we do, right? It's in the same moment as we are, but its life wave is different than ours. And this is something I can't explain. It's just something I feel and can conceive. And this is why I'm showing this, is because this is something, I suggest go watch these time-lapse films, or if you have a garden, go study a bit more. So basically, the metamorphoses of plants, this is Goethe's direct work, right? It's a process by which one and the same organ presents itself to us in manifold forms. This is ultimately what we want to see in the plant, right? And it modifies differently with different plants, but there's the fundamental stages, right? The sprout, the emergence of the sprout from the seed, the leaf, the development of the leaf, weaving itself into space, the stem, the development of the stem, the bud, the development of the bud, the flower and the fruit, right? So these are the stages of the plant developing. And it was sort of a picture of Goethe's archetypal plant, trying to show all the different things working into one, right? Because as an archetypal picture, this is what we want to conceive. Once you can get one plant, then you get multiple plants. And it's like I was talking earlier about the different worlds, right? Heliocentric, geocentric, try to conceive them together and you realize they're all the same thing. They might all exist. It's just where our perception is, and it's not contradictory. So these are basically the plant structure in three major parts, right? There's three phases of expansion and contraction. Goethe didn't really deal with the roots, which is interesting. Just what we see above the ground. So we can expand beyond Goethe, but we learn what he did. So basically, the cotyledons, right? The duality appears here, between the roots. So basically, as he saw it, the stem and leaves is expansion, the calyx, which is the sepals, the green part of the thing, that's a contraction. Right, and then the corolla, which is the petals, the calyx is the sepals, right? The sepal is one piece of the calyx, and the petals are one piece of the corolla. So the calyx is a contraction out of the expansion, and then it expands back out through the corolla. Then the pistil and stamen, which are the sex organs, we can call them, they contract again, that expands back into the fruit, which it contracts into the seed. So these are basically expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. These are metamorphic stages. And basically, death is inevitable, right? In order for the being of the plant, for the archetypal spiritual being that expresses itself through the plant to survive, it must go through these life and death stages. And this is something we need to consider about ourselves. Right, it goes from more active to less active in the fruits, and then starts over, the quantum superposition, as we can say, with the seeds. And there's something interesting too in the plants, the vertical and spiral tendencies of growth. So plants grow according to two principles: vertical tendency, spiral tendency. So obviously, if you can see it in the plant, it's not too hard to figure. Vertical main and side stems, spiral arrangements of leaves. So the blossom is the vertical and spiral tendencies separate. The pistil and carpel, right, are the male aspects in spiritual anastomosis. We'll get into this a bit, just pollen, female aspects in spiritual anastomosis. Anastomosis is like leaves, like the leaf weaves into space, right? Where basically as it's growing, it's putting out veins, and the veins meet up out in space, right? The etheric space is already there in the ether, we could say. The etheric body of the plant grows into, because the ether is temporal and it's sort of leading the plant into its growth. So that's anastomosis, just means that these things reach out and grow. And also the hyphae of the mycelium, they do anastomosis. They're always reaching out and connecting at certain nodes. But what's interesting about this, and I wanted to go, so the pollination reunites male and female growth principles, guaranteeing the continuation of species. So pollination is a metaphor for spiritual continuity. But I wanted to point this out, right? Because the vertical tendency is always thought of as the male, right? And the spiral is the female, which is the natural way to think of it. And Goethe warned against applying animal concepts to plants, right? Because they're different types of beings. And here's why, because as it metamorphoses, the spiral tendency metamorphoses into the stamens, which are basically the pollen, the sperm side. That's the female. The ovary, the carpel, right, the stigma, style, and ovary, that's the male, that's the vertical tendency. So it basically, yeah, it's the opposite of what people think, right? So what people call female plants, like in cannabis cultivation, it's actually, technically, it's the male plant, right? When you think of how it is, because so that's why I want to think deeply into these processes. Understand what's really what we need to rethink of. So basically,
I just hung up on that lady.
Somebody's unmuted. So I mean, can everybody check their muting, please? Yeah. Anyway, I put it strange but true. Shocking. Flowers talk to bumblebees using electricity. If a flower hasn't been visited recently by a bee, it gives off static electricity, which is orgone, basically. The static tugs at its tiny hairs on a bee's back, letting the insect know which flowers still have nectar. So, yeah, that's kind of like in the astral realm that we can think, because that's where the pollination happens. And of course, then we have the mycelium networks, with Goethe may have seen when he pulled roots out and stuff, but none of the understanding of that, which is the plants communicate through it. So there's a much larger, so when we go in, so we can go into the Goethean process and phenomenon like plants, seeing the whole of the plant, but we can also do it in seeing the whole of the mycelium. And then when we get to the method and connect all of these things, we're getting a much, much larger picture than Goethe did in his metamorphoses of plants. So the way is open for further development in all of this. We're all participants in it. I'm just scratching the surface to a certain extent. So we can cognize all the plants, the archetypal plant, all the plants on Earth right now, basically are one plant. The vegetative surface of the planet, through all its diverse metamorphic expressions, we can think of individual plants, but we, thinking of ourselves as individuals is kind of a false image, because we're absolutely symbiotic with each other, with the plants. We can't survive without plants. Our chemical interchange of the oxygen and carbon dioxide, which we have our, the hemoglobin and the chlorophyll interactions are like mirror images of each other. So basically all of the plants on the planet, we conceive of this in imagination as one plant. And then we can think of the plants through time, going back into basically through the tertiary, Mesozoic, the Paleozoic. And when did the land plants basically start? Supposedly during the Carboniferous, a little bit further than that. But as these different types came up, some came and went. Some are still here, the gymnosperms, the ginkgo, right? The ginkgo lasts the longest of a single species, quite interestingly. But then we get the angiosperms, right? They start showing up in the middle of the Mesozoic era. And these are the flowering plants. And of course, according to science, it's what a coincidence that insects appeared about the same time, right? The insect pollinators. What a coincidence from the discursive point of view. So anyway, this is going back in time. So we can see also, it's almost like the flowers flower out of this other diagram, going back in hundreds of millions of years, but who knows if these time frames are right, because here's human artifacts have been found in the Pennsylvanian coal beds, 300 million years old. So I don't tend to believe, you want to use that word, in these hundreds of millions of years. I think that the Earth is much younger. So here's an illustration. This is from one of David Attenborough's, but this is actually a representation of these different plants through time as they come and go. And this is such a beautiful representation of the metamorphoses of plants. So 300 million years, right? That's the Carboniferous era, coming up. And then we'll start coming up into the Mesozoic era. And here we are in the Jurassic, and these are the angiosperms. The flowering plants are the red part. So we can see that basically, if we can even conceive in an archetypal imaginative sense of the plants through time as a single great plant. So there must be some Goetheans. This, I guess, is Kew Gardens in the background. So there must be some Goetheans in there to have actually done this illustration. It's funny, I showed that in a talk I gave a few years ago, and I actually got a believe it or not, a copyright violation for putting it in. Well, they didn't take the thing down. I just couldn't put ads on, which they did not monetize me anyway on YouTube. So what difference did that make? So anyway, in plants, we have tropisms, growth movements of plants in regard to external stimuli. Geotropism, we can think of, this is supposed to be gravity and levity, but yeah, the roots go down. Hydrotropism, the roots will grow towards water, towards a water source. Heliotropism, plants basically follow the sun, and a plant which is grown outside, like a sunflower is grown inside, if it's brought inside, it will take a while before it goes into the phototropism mode. But actually, for a couple of weeks, it'll still follow the sun, even though it's in a room with just a light. The plant knows where it's at. And thigmotropism, right? Like the bindweeds and different things can reach out, or certain parasitical plants can reach out and grasp onto other plants or beans. So we know that there are these ones. Then there's nastic, non-directional responses to external stimuli. So there's different types of motions. But then there's the greater motion. So we thought of the plants through the whole global plant, the whole plant through time. And we have basically, in the trivium, right, the quadrivium, right, the cosmic. So let's go up to the plants in space and time. Planetary influences upon plants. So the biodynamic impulse leads to cosmological botany, exploring planetary relationships, both heliocentric and geocentric, as pivotal influences on plant morphology. But we'll see that the geocentric is actually more profound. Insight into plant development arises from observing the image of the planetary cosmos during the formative process. It's something we build in our imagination. Research investigates the rhythmical leaf movement and life processes, revealing rhythmic influences on growth, cell division, propagation, and metabolic activities in plants. So the standard hypothesis is that endogenic rhythms within plants drive these processes, but they haven't found them yet. They try to think certain genes do to certain things, but they don't not have a complete picture anywhere close. Other researchers highlight the rhythmic electromagnetic field of the Earth as a force field affecting plants, animals, and humans, intricately tied to cosmic influences, which is what we're basically looking at here in a greater sense. So field fluctuations influenced by the cosmic environment are incorporated into a larger cosmic framework. So research elucidates how planetary motions subtly impact biological systems, but even in a greater sense, it basically impacts the morphological structure of plants. So what we see up here, so Earth is in the center, and here is the sun going around. This is the moon, Earth, moon, sun, and basically, and this is Mercury. So from Earth, it looks like Mercury makes these patterns around the sun. So it's 3 outer, 3 inner. So here we see the 3 petals of the corona and the 3 sepals of the calyx. That's so this Mercury Sun synodic period is the cosmic signature of the monocotyledons in representation on Earth. And then basically here's Earth and Venus. Over 8 years, Venus does this pattern in the sky. So the dicots, the dicotyledons, that's the Venus Sun synodic period. And there are many more things. I'm just showing the basic ones. It's a big, big study. But even like the bindweeds, right? Like morning glories or gerias, wood roses and things. And they basically, even the flowers represent like the Sun Mercury pattern. Or the umbellifers. Some of the umbellifers basically are Jupiter, Mars, Sun interactions to pull things out. So there's a lot to it. We're thinking, I need to turn my pointer off. So overall, we have the archetypal plant. And from that, here's monocotyledons, which is basically Mercury and the moon as well. So basically, the grass is right. The grass is a monocot, which would make corn monocot. So basically, the moon, because they have roots. So you have the moon root kind of ball, and the stem is the sun all through everything, right? So predominant influence of sun and moon. Then the water lilies, they're basically the predominant of the moon growing up, and they flower on the top of the water. And then we have the dicotyledons, right? The bindweeds, Convolvulaceae, predominant influence of Mercury. And one of the interesting things in Mercury, right, is because Mercury, messenger of the gods, but the bindweeds, right? What do they contain? They contain some interesting compounds, right? The tryptophan-derived alkaloids, like beta-carbolines, like harmine, what was called telepathine, right? The stuff that's in ayahuasca is actually in these. And they also get ergolines, like lysergic acid. So they basically, the ones represent Mercury, actually can contain fundamental precursors to psychedelic compounds, which are the messengers of the gods, some could say. It's just a way of thinking of these things in an archetypal sense. But anyway, the buttercups, Venus, right, starts getting more beauty, filling out the flowers a bit more. Goethe called the rose the comprehensive manifestation of the type. He figured that was the perfect sort of flower. He wrote a lot about the metamorphoses of that. Then we get into umbellifers, like I showed on the previous one, where the Jupiter and Mars, but basically Jupiter is the influence, drawing out stems. So Jupiter and Mars overall help pull the stems out. Mercury is like leaves. Then we get the petioles, which is this stem of the leaf, we could say, what brings the leaf out, which is the influence of Venus when we start getting that into the leaves. It's all intertwined. Like I said, this isn't a lecture on that. I'm just showing this as part of the archetypal plant. And then basically the outer planets, both Jupiter and Saturn, because this just deals with the visible planet. Predominant influence of the far planets originating in the blossom region and the composites, which is the composites. But the composites, like the daisy, the sunflower, each petal is actually a flower. So that's why they call them the composites. So these are multiple flowers on the thing. So anyway, this just gives us, sense of form and morphology influenced by the cosmos. We find this is the cosmos as it appears from Earth. This is the anthropocentric world. It doesn't mean Earth isn't going around the sun. There's good evidence for that. But the sun going around the Earth in the higher form, it causes these. So matter of perspective, which perspective are you operating from? So cosmological botany, this is Lawrence Edwards' work. Tree buds change form rhythmically. The rhythms are those of the alignments of the moon with bodies of the solar system. A specific tree or flower changes the form of its buds in the rhythm of the lunar alignment with a specific body. Oak changes with Mars, beech with Saturn, birch with Venus. Cosmological botany shows from first mathematical principles a successful description of biological form. This implies DNA cannot alone be the propagator of living form, and random processes cannot alone drive evolution. So the formative processes are coming from outside, not inside the plant. So it's relating in a Goethean sense, we can say, right? Saying, well, does the plant have a soul? Is it conscious? Right? It's connecting with the universe in a sense. So basically, right, when the planet and the moon come into conjunction, right, we get the most perfect forms. Off alignment, it buds more elliptical, on the alignment. So anyway, out of this we get what we call path curve geometry, the ethereal space of path curve surfaces. And so with plants, so you can say, well, sure, sacred geometry, Fibonacci series, but it's using path curve geometry. There's different spirals interacting. And this is what we're now applying to bioarchitecture and other designs like water flow designs. So it's spirals coming from both sides interacting within the plant. And this is Olive Witcher's work, the plant between sun and earth. Highly recommend those books. So someday men will study the connection of the spiral growth of the plants with the movements of the planets, and then they will feel the kinship of the kingdoms of the earth with the kingdoms of heaven. Everything in the external world is a parable, a symbol. The laws of the growth of plants symbolize the movements of the planets, and these in turn are symbols of something even more sublime, deeds of spiritual beings in the cosmos. So that's what the plants are, the acts of the spiritual beings, we can think. So how do you see the higher realms, right? The secondary qualities we discussed in the first. What are the secondary qualities? Steiner also said the opening and the closing of the vegetative life of plants can be seen as a kind of communication or revelation from the universe to the earth. The vegetation of a given territory is compared to a sense organ, sensitive to all that is revealed from the cosmos towards the earth. When the interplay between the earth and the cosmos is more intense, the vegetative life opens up like the opening one's eyes to receive sense impressions. Conversely, when the interplay is less intense, the vegetative life declines and closes up, like closing one's eyes to the cosmos. So, yeah, the vegetation is alive to the cosmos. That's where its soul is. The soul of the plants is what we can call the tychonic universe, the anthropocentric universe. Its soul is outside of it because it's an expression of these beings on this plane. And this is what we looked at in the first one, the secondary properties that aren't real in science, right? Touch, taste, smell, sensation, hearing, sight. They're not real, right? They're just illusions being created, whereas they're that which are the richness of our soul experience, right? So in Steiner's, and it's taken me most of my life to even reach to this stage. I mean, I read about this stuff, but I wasn't able to experience it. So only now I'm actually putting it into lectures because I'm starting to see this. And so the second spiritual hierarchy, the spiritual world is populated by various ranks of spiritual beings. The second hierarchy creates and shapes the physical world, whose language speaks to our senses. Kuriotetes, the dominions of spirits of wisdom. The Kuriotetes, they're responsible for the cosmic intelligence and the laws of the universe. So they're associated with the planets and the stars, and they guide the evolution of human consciousness. According to Steiner, they're the highest spiritual beings that can be directly perceived by human consciousness. Then we have the dynamis, the virtues of spirits of movement. So they're responsible for the movement and growth of plants and animals. And if you remember, we go back to the Accademia del Cimento in the first part, right? The Contra Spiritus of Giovanni Borelli, right? Everything's mechanical. No, but these are the expressions of the dynamis, the virtues or spirits, of movement. They're also said to be responsible for the formation of the physical body during embryonic development. Then we have the exousiae, the spirits of form or powers, responsible for the forms and structures of the physical world, associated with the elements and the forces of nature, and they work to create and shape the physical world. They're responsible for the moral and spiritual evolution of humanity. So this is where going into the plant and the archetypal plant and then into the cosmological botany and reaching out in our imagination to connect with this world and experience within us. This is what we're reaching for. And in a sense, presenting this is kind of teleological, right? So, well, maybe there is a purpose here, but this is only because I've come to it myself. So I'm just expressing my experiences. That's what I say, for 30 years, I've been lecturing and showing these slides and talking about these things, but this is the first time I've ever brought these in, because I'm finally showing how I can actually show through how I started to reach these stages myself. But these archetypes are East and West. I always read like the Chan and Zen teachings and Hui Nung's Sixth Patriarch of Chan. His Platform Sutra was an early influence on me when I was young. So his Rapid Enlightenment School. Go look this stuff up. There's some really wonderful sort of animated sort of stories of this on YouTube about him now. We didn't have an internet when I was young. We had to read books and meditate. But anyway, teaches sudden awakening to realize enlightenment in the present moment, recognizes inherent enlightened nature of all beings, emphasizes meditation and introspection to purify the mind as a path to enlightenment, direct insight valued over scriptural knowledge, gradual cultivation, or intellectual analysis. This is gnosis, what we described in the first part. Rejects dualistic thinking and attachment to concepts, emphasizes the equality of all beings, rejects hierarchy and external forms of piety as means of spiritual progress, cultivates equanimity and non-attachment to phenomena, emphasizes awareness of the ultimate unity and non-duality of all things. So this is inspired by Buddha's flower sermon, and Buddha held up a flower, twirling it in silence. Only one of his students comprehended it, but it did show that Buddha could transmit the Dharma directly from teacher to student without words. So in the Goethean process, nature is our teacher, where we learn directly from her processes, and thereby in cosmological botany, gain knowledge of the higher spheres. So here's a meditation for you.